Welcome to SEL and EDU, the podcast where we explore how educators bring social emotional learning to life by sharing stories, strategies, and sparks of inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Krista Lay, owner of Resonance Education. Thank you for joining us on this SEL journey. Kathy Perret is an educational consultant specializing in instructional coaching, leadership development, and professional learning. As the co-author of Compassionate Coaching and the Coach Approach to School Leadership, she leads Kathy Perret Consulting to support school leaders, instructional coaches, and teachers via on-site and virtual learning around the world. Kenny McKee is an author and educator with an extensive background in instructional coaching, professional learning, and content design. He is the co-author of Compassionate Coaching, How to Help Educators Navigate Barriers to Professional Growth. Drawing on his experiences developing training for instructional coaches, designing educational content, and supporting district-level goals. Welcome back, SEL and EDU family. I am so excited to have Kenny and Kathy here for us to talk about their book, Compassionate Coaching. So welcome to both of you. If you don't mind, just take a moment to say hello and explain just a little bit of an overview about what your book, Compassionate Coaching, is about.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Kenny McKee, and I had the pleasure of writing this book with Kathy. Currently, I work in EdTech as a customer success manager, but I've had all types of different roles where I support educators, districts, including formally as an instructional coach, but also other roles that involve coaching. Compassionate coaching is really about finding a framework for coaching that allows for quick moves that you can make depending on certain situations teachers find themselves in that may be obstacles to their learning or their goals. And we can kind of elaborate on what some of those look like as we talk today. Kathy?
Yep, and I'm Kathy Perret, and I am based out of Sioux City, Iowa, and long experience in education, from a classroom teacher to a consultant to finding my love and passion of instructional coaching, and excited to be here. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. As we were talking about before we got on, that this has been a long time in the making because of just everybody's schedules. And there may have been some natural disasters that have happened in the area that Kenny lives in.
Helene was a mess.
Yes.
I won't lie.
Let's talk about that for a moment. How are they looking down in North Carolina in your region?
Yeah. So Western North Carolina, we're a resilient community. And just even yesterday, we were driving through a section where a lot of the flooding happened, and it's already a lot of the cleanup has occurred. There's still obviously places that are gone in various states of disrepair. But yeah, we're coming back as a community. So it's great to see. And I will say one of the shining spots post-storm for us was really getting to see our neighbors and our friends and family take care of one another. A lot of the divisions that you might see in everyday life really melted away. It was about people helping people.
I love that piece that you just said about resiliency and community and coming together and people helping people, because that reminds me of the basis of your book.
Right.
Having compassion, being moved to act, and how really, as a coach, it's educators coming together with other educators to support them when things don't go as expected and to celebrate the wins that people are having. And so I'm curious, Kathy, what motivated you to write the book?
I had a long experience as an instructional coach. I was trained by many of the great authors and such that we read. Started a Twitter chat, and it was a long-running chat, probably about 11 years, if I think back to that, called EduCoach. We're not in that space right now, but it was a wonderful time of learning. But what we noticed is we were sharing a lot of resources, a lot of strategies and ideas to help coaches, answering a lot of questions. But because it's such a public space, nobody really wanted to talk about the situations that they were encountering that were difficult. If there was a teacher that was lacking confidence or feeling like a failure or whatever. That was hard to talk about in a public space. We started to take notes. I think we voxed back and forth to figure out what is needed in the world of coaching that's not out there. So as we started to gather those ideas, we categorized them, we talked about them, we had a long list of the barriers that people were mentioning. We narrowed it down to the 6 that we put in the book, but we wanted a resource for teachers or coaches to be able to use when they notice these barriers in situations without having to go to a public space to talk about them.
And Kenny, what did you end up having as those 6 focus areas that really rose to the top?
So the funny thing is, some of them feel very connected. Like some are a more common type and some are a little bit more deep. For example, the first one that we address in the book is lack of confidence. The next one is failure. And we say failure is like lack of confidence with proof. Something has happened that has defined you in some way. And although those roots can be similar, you do have to address it a little bit differently when somebody feels like there's proof that they failed. The others that we talk about are overload, disruption, isolation, and then a capper there is school culture challenges, because that's more talking about how do you both thrive in a system that's not optimal? How do you work to change the system?
That systems piece and the culture is really important. When I think back on my 5 years as a coach, I often felt like an island unto myself. I was technically TOSA for a while, teacher on special assignment, before they moved it into a permanent position. I was asked my opinion, but I wasn't the decision maker. If there was a miscommunication or a lack of communication, I was a go-between. It was knowing what to share, what not to share, being able to keep people's confidentiality and support them, yet arising some big potential gaps that were causing some friction. I could have really used a book like this back then, thinking about what my role was and how I was supporting people. Because for me, it was just, you're a coach, let's send you to a couple things locally and here you go. There wasn't really an introduction to the staff on what this was going to look like. And I didn't know any different. So it was a sink or swim. And I'm seeing you both nodding.
You were asking us about why we wrote the book, and I think Kathy and I have lamented the number of folks that have gotten coaching roles and just have been sent out and thought, oh, you're a great teacher, we're just going to make you a coach now. And although there are some shared skills between those two roles, there are a lot of skills that are different between those two roles. Sometimes the view of the district or the view of the person or the organization that trained them might be very fixed compared to the dynamic of the school. We knew coaches were running into these situations that felt unique to them personally, but were not unique in the field. We wanted to develop some ways for them to respond to those situations that may not have been included in the framework for coaching that they learned or didn't learn in some aspects. We try to figure out a framework and actions that could be responsive, because even Kathy and I talked a little bit about our own coaching experiences were different, with her background being in an elementary school and most of mine being in a high school. What could work in both of those areas, and what were barriers we saw in both of those areas?
I've even worked with coaches because the school culture chapter is just so important, because these coaches have said, I'm in 2 different schools as a coach, and the culture is completely different. The 2 schools, what they're needing to do in either school is so different from each other. What can I do there in front of them to help them, guide them through? Because it's a challenge, whether you're in one school or you're in multiple schools. I've worked with coaches that are in 3, 4 schools that they're trying to coach.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was one of those coaches. I had 3 schools, and sometimes you would talk to folks that were working in one, and not saying that 1 or 3 is easier or harder, but they are different.
I like the way that you've said that. I was a secondary coach, so I worked in the middle school and the high school, and even the 2 different cultures there were very different among the teachers and then with the administrators, and then the relationships among departments and with admin. And I feel that in my work, a lot of it was on the instructional piece, but not as much on what the teachers were experiencing, how they were showing up, how they were feeling about the process for themselves as their identity as a teacher. I went back to work at a school district that I graduated from. So here I am, a former student who worked with them for 7 years and is now working with them in a different capacity and needing, I think, to show myself as a learner in the process with them. Not that I knew more, but that I was a learner. I would probably want to pull out your book and use it as a resource in front of people. Have you had somebody say that before?
Yeah, I've heard them use it lots of different ways. Now, I know that one thing that some people have asked us for are look fors and things like that. Kathy and I basically decided that's applying a very concrete, clear-cut element to something that's messy, which humans are messy, but more of trying to identify these barriers in your conversations and work with teachers. And I think that you could be transparent once you've named something. If the teacher agrees, like, hey, I'm really struggling with my confidence right now, or I really am overwhelmed or overloaded. I don't think there's any problem with that, but I do feel like the teacher has to name that that's the barrier. How do you feel about that, Kate?
Yeah, I would agree. There's nothing wrong with pulling out the book and looking at an idea or something, but I think it's those initial conversations with teachers. As I coach, I do a lot of virtual coaching, and I'm always listening for their background story, even if it's when we're just connecting with each other on a personal level and what I hear them saying. And I can then pull through my lens and start to go, they might be lacking confidence here, or they feel isolated. They don't have anybody to collaborate with, and they're eating up this coaching because it's the first time they get to collaborate with somebody. I think every situation's different, and I think it depends on the teacher and the coach and the trusting relationship that they've built with each other.
You just mentioned, Kathy, collaboration, and that's so incredibly important. When I reflect back on my years, I don't know that I had the support to be an effective collaborator as much as it was a problem solver. This is much more powerful. Do you mind expanding upon the collaboration part and what that means in the coaching process?
Well, a lot of it is how coaching is introduced to the staff, because unfortunately, it's introduced more as this coach can help fix you and fix the problems that we're having or fix the problems in student achievement that we're not seeing. And that's not what a coach really is. That coach is that guide on the side and that collaborator and that problem solver, and it's more a peer. So I think it goes back to how it's introduced, and then how can that coach continue to act as that collaborator rather than coming in with all the ideas. A lot of times I tell coaches, take yourself out of it. If you have a good idea to share, don't share that you did it in the classroom and make you sound like the expert teacher. Share that you saw another teacher do this idea and it's what you did, but frame it in a different way so that the teacher doesn't start to say, oh, this coach just thinks they're wonderful and that they did it all and they were so great at what they were doing. So just take yourself out of the formula and share the ideas from another viewpoint.
One of the things we talked about in the book is if you are going to make a suggestion, generally you should ask first, but if you are going to make a suggestion, give them a couple. And then there are options, not too many, because then you're going to overwhelm them. Another option is to go a different way. And that's why it's really a collaboration. And I feel like for me, working with my experience as high school coach, it may have helped me in the collaboration aspect in that I worked with every subject area. And so there was no way I could be an expert in every content area. It was a collaboration of expertise. My expertise were in literacy and reading and assessment, but their expertise were like their students. They knew more about their students than I did, and they knew more about their subject than I did. And together we could pull those expertise to really create something amazing for kids and address whatever the goals are for the school or district at the same time.
What I both heard you say in there is that the collaboration leads to teacher agency, that they're not being told what to do, but they get to have an active say in what that next step is because of their expertise with the particular group of students, with the content, with knowing their space. What was your absolute favorite part to write?
I'd have to say some of the favorite chapters I had were more the lack of confidence and isolation for a couple different reasons. One, those were the areas I worked in a lot. When I was a coach, we were learning new strategies, and it was under a grant, and it was high stakes that we had to do what we had to do. But we had a lot of lack of confidence because they were totally new strategies, things that people had not really heard of in the literature out there, but they were very powerful strategies and models that we were using. So the lack of confidence chapter really was fun to write because I could pull from my past experiences and remember the great work that we did in that situation. We started EduCoach. We were isolated as coaches. You're sometimes the only coach in a school. I worked sometimes with K-12 teachers when I was a literacy consultant. I started to realize there's only one high school chemistry teacher. There's only one music teacher in the school. So how can my reading across the curriculum strategies help them, and who do they collaborate with? The other favorite part Kenny and I talk about a lot is that we wrote probably half the book during COVID. That gave us some great time to write, and we had other things off our plate. Kenny probably not so much because he was dealing with 2 kids at home. My work came to a standstill, but it was also a time for self-discovery because we went through these barriers ourselves. So lack of confidence. I was taking care of my 90-some-year-old father in a pandemic, and just the lack of confidence or the isolation through that. Some of those feelings came up, and how do we move past that in any walk of life? These 6 barriers are not just teacher driven. I do a lot of crocheting right now, and I go through all the barriers basically in my crocheting, and then I have to coach myself with the focus area on what do I need.
You hit on a couple pieces that really resonated with me. So many of the chapters that you have in the book deal with life themes and thinking about not only how you can show up and partner and collaborate with colleagues, but be a good friend and help walk through life with people. I had to bring up your crocheting piece because my mother tried to teach me to crochet, and I'd always end up with a triangle. So I'm more towards knitting and cross stitch, but I've recently been trying to crochet. I have a wooble that's half made. It's a little turtle. I can't tell you how many times I wound the entire thing to redo it. It's at least 5, 6, 7 times.
And you feel like you lack confidence. And so you're using YouTube as your partnership piece. And I have to tell you, my first dishcloth turned into a triangle too. Because it's like all my crochet friends would say, you have to count your stitches. I'm like, I don't want to count.
That's my issue too. But I think as in things with life, the more you try and you persevere and you get there, and then you feel the joy of the success. But it does take, like in crochet or teaching something new, a new strategy, it takes multiple times till we feel comfortable with something and competent, which can help us become confident. Kenny, what was your favorite part to write?
Yeah, a lot of those parts also resonate with me, but I do have sometimes like a logic-oriented mind. And something about that coaching through failure chapter really was interesting to me. One, because I got to explore how can we reframe looking at data as information to drive forward. In that chapter, we dabbled with using different types of thinking, like design thinking, or looking at coaching as an opportunity to do action research, looking at a lens from that angle, thinking about how we can reframe the way that we approach coaching to really aspects of failure, to really reframe those as opportunities to learn or discover new things.
As you were talking there, I had these ahas, and I don't know why it didn't connect with me before, but you talked about design thinking. And when I hear that, I think about empathy and being able to put yourself in a different perspective to see what is truly needed as a support. And then with action research, thinking about the scientific process and responsible decision making, and how perhaps this book could be more expansive as well. And not just for instructional coaches, but how educators can be supporting their students through some of these barriers. What else have you heard has been resonating with people, or new ahas that they've been making, or parts that they really enjoyed?
Yeah, I feel like some of the parts of those chapters, there's a data protocol that we talk about that's resonated with a lot of folks. A lot of the strategies we came up with were bite-sized so they could be flexible to use. Overall, I just hear from people that the book itself is a quick, easy, entertaining read. Like they feel like it resonates with them. It calls out things that maybe some other books don't, but it stitches together a story and then action, what you can do. A lot of the feedback I get is really about how the book feels conversational. You feel supported by us when you're reading it. It paints a scenario at the beginning of each chapter so you can see what this looks like in different places, different contexts. And then it really weaves into an exploration of ideas and actions you could take.
Well, it came out in the summer, if I remember correctly. And we heard a lot of people reading it straight through in the summer. But then as the school years started, they were able to pull it off the shelf when they started to see those situations come up and kind of review if the teacher's lacking confidence. What ideas could I possibly bring to the table? How could I approach this situation with the coach and teacher relationship? I think they like that they just don't go on and on about a strategy. They're about 2 paragraphs long and they go on to another idea. And so I think that's resonated with some of the coaches that have read it.
What has been your most memorable experience as a coach?
As I said earlier, I worked in that grant situation and the strategies were different. The approaches were different. We did a lot of peer coaching. We used data to drive our instruction, and it was hard work. And I had teachers at the end of that. Sometimes I still have them coming up to me, and that's been 10, 15 years ago, to say those were some of the best learning and growing and experiences I've had as a teacher. I had one teacher at the end of the year back then say, "You knew when to push and you knew when to pull it out of me. I'll never go back to teaching the way I used to." They weren't used to using data to drive their instruction. Now we have an abundance of data going on because we think we need all of this data, where we need some data and be able to teach. I think we've gone maybe a little too far on the data collection side, and we get to that drip piece of data rich and information poor. But those years in my coaching were probably some of the best.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I can still see it when they talk about school, those teachers that I talked with. I'm like, they wouldn't have talked about this this situation in our lives, but I can tell how they use the data, they drive the instruction, they practice the strategies until they get close to executive control, just like we talked with crochet. We want to continue to have triangular dishcloths, or do we want to practice it until we gain some control over that? And then can we use that skill to try something else? How can we go from the dishcloth to the blanket or the whatever?
Sometimes we don't know something's a barrier until we jump in.
Your question about a memorable experience. It's hard to pinpoint one, but what I do feel like has been most memorable for me is when you're working with someone through a coaching process and you see their kids do something they did not believe they could do before. Whenever that happens, it's just the best thing. And working with teachers, sometimes, again, the idea of action research, like they'll say, what if this doesn't work? It may not work. And I think that is freeing to people to try something new, to know that it's about iteration. It's about us really discovering what's going to really help kids learn, help them be engaged. Yeah, there's a couple of instances that come up in my mind, but really the unifying pattern is it's when the teachers might have this vision of what the kids could do, but didn't believe they could achieve it. And then we actually see it, or we see even greater than that vision they had.
Even as somebody who works with educators, I'm trying new things and it might not work. It's a little scary to do that, especially with adults. But then it's what could have made this different? What advice do you have? What recommendations? And then let's try it again. What input can you solicit from the students about their experience? What advice would you give somebody who was starting off more as a novice coach? Maybe it's their second year in the building or they're expanding into another building, in terms of maybe some starting points or some thoughts or mindsets they should consider?
Wow. That's a great question. One of the things I think is really how you introduce yourself as a coach in the coaching process and working really closely with the administrator to be a shared message on that. It's hard for a coach to have an administrator that's absent in the coaching process, but what's harder is an administrator that misrepresents the coaching process. I think if they're not interested in that, if you're a district coach and working in different schools, sometimes that happens, then you can frame that story about what your role is. But if the principal's really going to be a big part of it, and they should be, working with them on that, I think you start with the willing. You find the folks that are willing to work with you. You might even work with some of the strongest teachers. People think like coaching is about what's your next steps. So it doesn't matter if you're an expert teacher or a novice teacher. Everybody has next steps, right? If you can partner with some of the stronger teachers or the teachers that have a good reputation among their peers, sometimes that spreads the power of coaching. That's another recommendation I would have. Now, if you are told who you're going to coach, if there's very strict guidelines on your coaching assignment, that may be trickier. But if you have the flexibility, I say start with some of the stronger teachers. The other thing you mentioned earlier about students and student voice, I think one, involving the students in the coaching experience, as far as if you're co-teaching or maybe you're modeling a lesson as a coach, is really powerful. I use it as my secret weapon as far as kids behaving because you get this random person up in front of the room. It could be like a sub, right? They could treat you all types of ways. But I always said, we're hoping to learn more about your learning, and we want you to give us feedback at the end of this lesson. And I noticed that kids became super engaged in whatever you were doing at that point, which is a cool trick to think of as a teacher, right? I want your feedback on how this is going. And so generally at the end of those lessons, we try to finish where we have 5 minutes or so to talk with the students. I would just ask them 2 questions. What helped you learn today? And what got in the way of your learning? Then the teacher and I would have those responses to reflect on. I think just saying that this may not work, you were talking about that earlier, takes a lot of pressure off everybody.
I love those 2 questions. That's a great way to get insights from educators, from students, and using that little bit of data to figure out what your next steps could be.
Yeah. And notice the framing those questions. What helped you learn? Not what did you like? Helps them think about the learning process.
Thank you for that clarification, because I think that part would have stuck as much if you hadn't put a pin in it.
When you ask them what they said, bring candy or food, which is great.
Of course.
But it doesn't help the learning process, really focusing on that action of learning.
Kenny mentioned so many great things. The thing that really speaks to me is that even though you're the coach, you really should be the most coachable person in the school. So seek a coach of your own, whether it's another coach in the district, somebody from outside your district, a mentor, whatever. That's what I do. I virtually coach teachers and coaches. It's finding that person to help you think through your reflective practices so that you can therefore help teachers reflect on their practices. It's that guide on the side. It's somebody wanting you to achieve your goals, not to give the goals to you. In the classroom setting with the coach, one of the things I've seen coaches do is that in time, it's not going to happen the first time you coach with a teacher that school year because you have to build upon these things. But to find ways to collect a couple data points your conversation, just like Kenny had the couple questions at the end of the lesson, and those were his data points to then drive the coach and teacher conversation. If a teacher wants to work on student engagement and their idea is to maybe tally who's speaking in that class, who's engaging, who's providing answers, that type of thing, the coach can sit and tally that, and that's one piece of data. But then maybe have some type of content piece at the end. Maybe it's a ticket out the door where the teacher asks the students to now respond to a question about their learning in that class period. And now lay those two pieces of data together on the table. I've seen coaches say that the teacher made these ahas. Oh, this student engaged a lot and they were able to write about the concept. This student was silent most of the time and was able to write about the content because, it's going to, but then what does that data tell us about the next steps and lessons? So it's collecting data, but it's not that assessment data, that one-time like phonemic awareness test or the state test or whatever. It's that in-the-moment data that drives then your next lesson because this is where students are at. So a couple tips for coaches.
I especially like that comparison because it's not a right or a wrong. It's just where do I need to go next? What are some next possible steps to continue this learning and this growing for us all? Just two more questions. I have a music theme going at the end of every episode here because I always think that music brings people together and it helps us connect and learn. And so I'm curious, is there a song that's been on repeat for you or a certain group that has just really been resonating with you lately?
I'm old. If I was to ask Alexa to play something right now, it'd be 70s rock because one, I know the words to the song. It brings back college days, late 70s, early 80s. So that's my go-to. I wouldn't be able to name anything of what's current. We have a big music festival in my town on the 4th of July or the Saturday by the 4th of July called Saturday in the Park. And it's a free concert and it brings like 25,000 people in our park and it's huge. And this year's headliner was Teddy Swims. And I didn't know who it was, but everybody was so excited about him. And I wasn't able to be there for the duration of the park. I did go up there and show my nephew, but so I'm not real current in music, but give me some good 70s rock and I'll clean your house.
I've been listening to some stuff that gets suggested to me. Now, I'm of the school, maybe this is a Gen X thing, but I like Pandora. I know that many people have moved on to Spotify or other apps, but I like listening a lot to Tame Impala, this group called Cannons that I really like. We saw Band of Horses recently and Lord Huron, stuff like that. That type of stuff is like me hanging out on the back deck when it's cool type music or going for a walk.
It's interesting to collect and to expand my own awareness of what's out there. So thank you. As we work on wrapping up, I'm going to put the ways to connect with both of you in the notes. But for people who are listening, what are the best ways for people to get a hold of you?
For me, my consulting email is one of the best. It's just my name, Kathy Perret Consulting @gmail.com. I am on Instagram more. I have 2 accounts. I have the Kathy Perret and I have a crochet one too. You can look me up on Hooked on Sunny Days and we'll look at crochet. So those would be the best. My website does have a form to get in contact with me, but sometimes my website's been kind of buggy lately. So probably the Gmail's the best. I'm not a TikToker, so don't look for me on TikTok.
I'm more of a TikTok viewer than a contributor. Right now, I would say that I'm most active on LinkedIn of all places. And so you can look for Kenny McKee, but I think my actual LinkedIn, the endpoint, how it writes the web link is Kenneth C. McKee. And we can drop that. I think I may have already given that to you, Krista. And then you can also reach out to me on Blue Sky or Twitter. I'm not contributing a lot, but I do check the accounts. So if you reach out to me, I will respond. And then I also have an Instagram that's also Kenny C. McKee. It's more personal, but you're welcome to reach out to me on there as well.
Thank you so much to both of you. I love the work that you do. I love the approach that you have that supports the coaches and the teachers and the students. I look forward to continuing to share your work with people. So thank you for your time and sharing your expertise.
Thank you, Krista. It's been a joy to be here and hope that we can connect later.
Yeah, thanks for having us today. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of SEL in EDU. At Residence Education, we equip educators with knowledge, skills, and resources to design learning experiences that foster students' academic, social, and emotional growth. We believe that every small action to foster connections and growth creates ripples shaping the future.